So to take you through the first one, cognitive theory and memory. So for schools that choose cognitive theory and memory as a new choice for this year, we'll be using lots of the learning, research and reading that we've used with schools in this year of the project. So we'll be looking at some key reading and research from Dunlosky, Bjork and William, and we'll be looking really at 3 of the 7 recommendations from the IES over the course of the year. So the recommendations are huge and there's lots of scope within them, so we're going to look at 3 rather than try and squeeze 7 in over the course of a year. So the first strategy that we looked at this year was distributed practice, which is a different model to the model many schools are using now. So traditionally in our schools, over a term we might teach one topic or theme, and then the next term we teach something completely different. But the idea of distributed practice is that you might teach a concept or a theme or a topic for a shorter amount of time, leave a space or a gap, and then revisit that topic, theme or learning and look to really deepen and embed that learning, and then leave another space of time and revisit and deepen and embed again. And research suggests that doing that has a greater impact on children's ability to really remember and retain the information that they've been taught. And we've all been there. We've taught children where we've said, we've definitely done this. We've done this. You did it last year. You definitely did it. Why can't you remember? But actually, it's very difficult for children to remember if they've had a massed practice experience and then not gotten back to that for a period of time. It's very difficult for them to remember. But the research suggests that if we distribute this practice, then children are much more likely to retain what they've learnt over a longer period of time, and it's more likely to move from their working memory into their long-term memory. As you saw in the video clip, schools have been really successfully using some different models of distributed practice, and one example of that is the Leitner model, which schools have been using really successfully for whole classes in some cases, for things like spelling, and where we need children to really know those key facts and key knowledge. Some schools have used it really successfully for intervention as well. So for particular groups of children, some schools have found it more manageable to have sort of a group of 6 and they're working through that as a timed intervention. The second strategy that we've looked at this year is spaced learning, which is a really interesting one. On the EEF website, there's a pilot study called Smart Spaces, which is very interesting if you want to have a read over the summer holidays, a bit of summer reading time. But it talks about spacing over the course of a lesson rather than spacing over time that we've just discussed in the distributed practice. And what spaced learning then is for one lesson, the teacher would give maybe 10 to 15 minute input, some new learning, some new concept, and the children would then have a space, and that space would be a brain break, a complete gap, where they might do some different distractive activities. So they might take advantage of going outside and having a run around, they might play with some Lego, all sorts of different things. People have been using Go Noodle across the county, videos getting children active in the classroom. So they have that gap within the lesson. The teacher would then teach another 10 to 15 minutes linked to that first 10 to 15 minutes of learning, and the children would be expected to rethink about the learning from the first part of the lesson. Their brains would have to work hard to try and retrieve what the teacher said post-break. The teacher may scaffold some things for them, but they would have to start applying some of that key learning from the first part of the session. There would then be another space in that lesson, another gap, distractor activity, and the last 10 to 15 minutes of the lesson, the children engaged in activities to really apply and practice what they've learnt. So the idea of distributed practice, but in one lesson. The Smart Spaces study that's available on the EEF, they looked at secondary GCSE pupils, and they looked at spaced learning within lessons compared to children studying the sciences in a more massed practice way that we're used to. And the impact was quite phenomenal that they found. Actually, when you've got the spaces within the lesson, in terms of pupil attainment, their attainment was much higher and their progress much faster than children that had had the massed practice. The theory behind that is that if we have these spaces, whether that's over time or within a lesson, our brain starts to relax a little bit and we start to slightly forget the things that we've been taught. When that knowledge is then reintroduced or we re-experience something, our brain has to work really hard to try and recall and retrieve and remember the things that we've been taught, and then we then start to embed and deepen that knowledge. The more times that our brain has to really think hard and has to retrieve and remember that information, the more likely our learning is to move from our working memory into our long-term memory, which is what we're all interested in. We really want children to be able to remember and retain the key knowledge and facts that they need to be successful and to be able to then work through those higher order tasks and higher order thinking, problem solving. The third strategy that we've looked at this year is retrieval practice, which is how we support children then to be able to remember and retrieve the things that we have taught them. So there are different strategies that we can use in school, and we've explored some of those this year. So we've looked at multiple choice questions and how they can be used to really support children with retrieval. We've looked at use of mind maps, blank mind maps and partially scaffolded mind maps. And we've looked at quizzes. People have tended to call them rather than low stakes testing, but that's what we're talking about. And the fact that the more we do those things, the more likely children are to retain and remember what they've been taught. Excitingly, across the county, we had 3 neuroscience trials take place based on all of our cognitive theory and memory work. So that was over 1,000 pupils involved across schools in the county. Doing a small, wasn't that small really, quite large-scale trials in the end, looking at distributed practice, retrieval practice, and a little bit of a look at interleaving as well. Some really promising findings from those trials that suggest that particularly for our SEND pupils and pupil premium, that distributing practice and spacing practice and really focusing on retrieval does have a very positive impact on pupil attainment and progress. For schools thinking of continuing with cognitive theory and memory, because they've done that as their choice this year, we would be really looking to start to embed and deepen some of the knowledge from year 1 of the project. We would also be looking to introduce some new learning, because we've covered 3 out of the 7 recommendations. So we'd be looking to introduce some new learning, and the key one that we haven't covered this year that we will cover in year 2 is interleaving, which is really where we mix things together. So in the Smart Spaces study again, instead of teaching discretely biology, physics and chemistry, interleaving is where you would teach the 3 together. So in one lesson, or over a period of time, you would actually interleave your physics with your chemistry with your biology. So very interesting. And something we would look at in year 2 of the project. For schools that are in the second year, we'd also be looking to really support you with how to plan for whole school implementation of these strategies. Lots of schools in the first year, quite rightly, have had school-based leads that have had to go in their own classroom, or they've spread across their year group. But for the second year, we'd really be looking to support schools into how to then can we make sure that that practice is whole school, it's a whole school improvement priority, and we've got consistency across our setting. And we'd be looking to help you with planning that, how to evaluate that, and how to collect some data and some evidence in your own schools to show the real impact of those changes that you're making. As Vanessa said, that could also lead into applications for our small-scale grant-funded trials. So for any of our choices this year, once you're working well within your choice, you've got the opportunity to come along to one of our free training sessions for a day, where we show you how you might plan a small-scale trial, what you might need to do in terms of data analysis, and how you might write a funding bid. And then you'll have the opportunity to apply for some funding and some support from the Mobilise team and the Cairo Research School. This tends to be for schools in the second year of the project, when you've had to go at quite a few of the different strategies. You've got some in-school data that you can show as promising, and then you can, if you come to us, we can signpost you further for some extra support from the team and some funding.